The first set of questions is about the Arafura class offshore patrol vessels. Going to the design of those vessels, the Navy website listing the capabilities of SEA 1180 does not include a mention of helicopter. The Brunei version of our offshore patrol vessel has a deck that an 11-tonne helicopter can be landed on. Were there any changes made throughout the SEA 1180 which downgraded the strength of the helicopter deck?
Rear Admiral Wendy Malcolm, Head Patrol Boats and Specialist Ships. Senator, the requirement for our offshore patrol vessel did not include a helicopter as part of the top-level user requirements.
And what is the reason for that?
I might ask Chief of Navy if he'd like to speak to that.
Senator Vice Admiral Mark Hammond, Chief of Navy. The Arafura was designed for constabulary roles to replace the Armidale class patrol boats, which do not operate helicopter capability. It was a minimum viable capability off-the-shelf solution to provide that constabulary effect. That's why it wasn't included.
Thank you. So the Brunei version would have been upgraded or upgraded to handle a helicopter?
That's reasonable speculation, but I'm not sure, Senator. Okay.
So you didn't derate it or reduce the strength of the deck, you just wanted the base model, so to speak?
I'd characterise it as the Navy did not specify helicopter capability as the requirement.
Okay, thank you. Now get to Mr Moriarty. Turning to the $45 billion Hunter-class ship acquisition, Mr Moriarty, Australian taxpayers have already handed over $4 billion and we still don't have a boat. At the Joint Committee inquiry, you accepted that there have been design flaws in the process and that records needed to be formalised and recorded. How is it acceptable that on a $45 billion project proper records weren't kept? How did this happen? Where were the records? Why weren't they kept?
Senator, thank you. There's been a lot of work done into examining the history of the Hunter-class program, which goes back to 2014. Certainly the ANAO and then subsequent internal departmental work have identified that some key records were not retained. That is a flaw in our system, and the Deputy Secretary has been putting in place a number of initiatives to enhance overall compliance with Defence Record Management Policy. And there are, of course, Senator, a number of other initiatives which we've put in place.
Well, Mr Moriarty, during the Joint Committee inquiry, you stated that you were not aware that standard procedures were not being followed. How is this possible, that you weren't aware?
Senator, after I assumed the position of Secretary of the Department of Defence, the process was already in flight. I delegate authorities to subordinate committees to bring forward work to decision-making committees. The fact that some of what I would regard as appropriate procedures had not been followed, the fact that those had not been followed were never brought to my attention.
Isn't it something that you would make sure of in a project that's worth $45 billion? Because you're paid more than $1 million a year, as I understand it. General Campbell is paid more than $1 million a year. That's each of you almost double what the Prime Minister's paid. But between the two of you, it's 4 times what the Prime Minister's being paid. With that amount, surely the Australians who pay you expect you to know what happens in your department. Why don't you know?
Senator, there's been a great deal of work done to talk about the inadequacies of some aspects of the Hunter procurement, but I think it's also reasonable when you delegate authorities to subordinate committees or to capability managers to bring forward, it is reasonable that they will pursue government requirements and procedures and internal defence procurement procedures. So the Defence Committee structures that lead ultimately to these Investment Committee and Defence Committees, they're intended to ensure that I, as the accountable authority, can effectively govern. You have to assume that the authorities below you understand their obligation and will comply with our own procedures and the requirements of in particular, the PGPA.
Thank you. Let's delve a bit deeper then, because you blame Defence for not following proper process of developing advice, tender evaluation, source evaluation for the Hunter Frigates because of an accelerated time frame. Yet the government brought forward the process to 3 years. Do you still maintain that reasoning? The government, as I understand it, accelerated the process.
It did indeed, Senator. The original timeline.
Did the time compression affect the department's process and the government advice that resulted from it?
I think it's the ANAO report and then subsequent work done within the department suggested that yes, that had there been more time available to do some of that work, then there would have been more validity to some of the...
Did Defence ask for more time?
The government took a decision about the timeline it wished to pursue, Senator. The government was aware and made aware by this department that pursuing an accelerated timeline increased risk.
So in the inquiry, as I understand it, you said, quote, "I think we did not seek more time." And another quote, "The government's timeline was very clear, but that does not absolve us of the requirement to have made a value for money judgment."
Yeah.
Why? Isn't it your responsibility to ask for more time if you know accelerating the timeline is going to compromise the process?
I am required to comply with lawful and reasonable directions of the elected government of the day. When the elected government of the day tells me that it wishes to proceed at a certain period of time, I can alert them to risks and risk mitigation strategies.
Did you do that?
But that is the government was alerted to the risks of an accelerated timeline.
You alerted them?
The department, of which I'm the secretary, alerted the government to the risks of an accelerated timeline.
Because you also are quoted as saying at the inquiry, "I'd say the government was aware that bringing forward a program of this scale and complexity by 3 years obviously introduced additional areas of risk." So I'm wondering if you're being evasive, because you say it's the government's fault for speeding up the timeline, yet you never provided advice to the government such that it would make you essentially break your rules around processes. Are you trying to have bob each way to make sure you have a job later when this Hunter falls over?
The government was dealing with a range of complex pressures. One of them was the need to build and have a continual shipbuilding program in South Australia. In order to do that, it needed, or it wished to hit some milestones in terms of a project decision so that work could get underway. In order for work to get underway, it needed to have the department contribute to advice to government by a certain period of time. The department was made very well aware of what the government's timeline was for when it wished to make a decision.
Okay, is Mr Yiannopoulos here? I saw him a minute ago. Yeah.
Senator, I would just ask, maybe in the future too, it would be helpful to get the full context of what, I'm not disputing what you're saying in terms of the transcript, but it would be great to get the full context and maybe a printout of that so that other senators, and including the witnesses, can have a look at maybe the context about what was said and asked at the time.
Thank you, Chair, I will.